So the actual decision to withdraw the troops was not very controversial by most Afghans, because there was an understanding that the US would need to withdraw for the war to be over, for the peace process to succeed, because Taliban had made it clear that they would not end their insurgency as long as US troops were present in the country. And most Afghans also understood that the US would at some point leave Afghanistan. I think the actual decision to withdraw was not very controversial with Afghans. The way the withdrawal was handled is a different question. Most Afghans who were not aligned with the Taliban, which I would argue is the majority, were hoping that some sort of a political agreement would have been reached before the US withdrew from Afghanistan, to avoid the events that unfolded in the country, to avoid a complete to take over by the Taliban, to make sure that other elements of the society would have a voice, and this post-US political system would be a mixture of Taliban view as well as opposition view. But the way the withdrawal was happened, coupled with the failure of political leadership in Afghanistan, resulted in a situation where Taliban had basically came to completely take over the country, and now all the elements of opposition in the society, different constituencies, are completely defenseless. So it is completely taken over by the Taliban. It is an outcome that many would have liked to avoid, and they saw the way the withdrawal happened, the way the peace process happened, contributing to this outcome, and that's, I think, a part of the anger. In terms of evacuation, that's a different issue, and the U.S. Evacuating its troops, its citizens, other countries as well, and some Afghans who work with them. That's a different issue. It was obviously not very well planned because of the fact that the Taliban takeover was so unexpected. And there's been obviously a lot of heartbreaking imagery and a lot of heartbreaking events that unfolded because of the fact that this was not well planned. People were stampeded, they lost their children, and they got separated from their families. And it led to a situation, chaotic situation, that the Islamic State branch of Khorasan, ISKP, took advantage of, and we had the horror, kind of culminated in that horrible suicide attack that we saw 2 days ago. So, I mean, overall, it's a mixed feeling, and it's more about how things were handled rather than just the whole idea of the US leaving. I mean, obviously, President Ghani was in charge for 7 years. So, I mean, he was the commander-in-chief, the person who was almost often at times himself and few of his advisors were monopolizing power in the country, state power in the country. So what unfolded in Afghanistan is to a large extent due to his policies. And it's not about the last days or last months even. He was in charge for 7 years. And during that time, he pursued certain policies that undermined Afghanistan's national unity, weakened Afghanistan's national security forces. So when we talk about President Ghani's term, we have to keep in mind that we are talking about a track record of 7 years, not few days. But towards the end, absolutely, there was hope that if he had stayed in Kabul, there would have been a chance for having an interim transitional government instead of Taliban completely taking over. Because the Taliban formal statement was that they would not enter Kabul if Ghani had agreed to step down and hand over power to a transitional authority. That agreement is attested to by many people who were familiar with the matter. Whether the Taliban would have kept their words or not, that's a hypothetical scenario. We don't know what would have happened in that case, but there was a hope that it would have happened, and the Afghanistan national institutions that are mostly based in Kabul would not completely collapse, because there will be an orderly transition of power. That obviously did not happen because President Ghani, for whatever reason, chose to fled the country. So a lot of Afghans are mad for the past 7 years, and also for the handling of the last few hours of his presidency. And I do personally believe he doesn't have legitimacy in the eyes of Afghans. If you talk to anyone, it would be hard pressed to find someone who has sympathy for him anymore. And that's one of the reasons no international actor has given any credence to his message that he would like to be involved in the future Afghan politics. I think other elements of his government also have a similar kind of track record hold against them, because many people accuse them of failing to protect the population, failing to actually strengthen the national institutions of the country. So, and what I tweeted was basically the same sentiment, that if you are going to give platform to someone to talk about what happened in Afghanistan, make sure it's not someone who's responsible for the horrible things that happen in the country. And in some cases, these are like flagrant. I mean, if you just Google the name, you will you will see many reports of major serious allegations against these people. So I think we just have to be careful whom, like the Western media, we should be careful about whom they give platform to. Just because of the fact that some people often, because they speak fluent English, or just because they have fancy degrees, they are given more legitimacy that they deserve, and we should really hold them accountable to what they did. I think many Afghans feel the same way. There are trends calling for justice with regard to what happened in the country. Biden rhetoric has from very start been criticized for his lack of, for his disregard for Afghan lives, and also his unwillingness to accept any responsibility for how things unfolded in Afghanistan. It is true that Afghan political leadership bears the majority of the responsibility, but it's also true that the American was a major player, arguably the single major player. And whatever was achieved or whatever went wrong in the past 20 years can be attributed to the US policy of different administrations. So his unwillingness to accept any responsibility, also his lack of compassion, empathy, and just general lack of general disregard for Afghan lives has been criticized in the past. And his last speech was no different. It was kind of an uncharacter for him. And also the fact is that it's not just Biden. I mean, all other news outlets in the United States, often they led with the headline of how many American lives were lost, despite the fact that the number of Afghan lives lost was much larger. The reason that the Afghans were gathered there, the way they were, and the security situation that had developed was in part, not entirely, but was in part the result of the handling of evacuation. So the US played, and other international actors had a role in what unfolded. So it was not just something that happened exogenous to whatever they were doing. Towards the end, it was the chaos that unfolded in the country could be attributed, at least in part, to how little planning and was there, how little understanding of the complexity was there. So I think Afghans might have gotten used to it at this point because of the fact that it's not the first incident, and it's not really their first encounter even with a foreign force in the country. It's not the first withdrawal from Afghanistan, as you know, and the US invasion of Afghanistan was not the first invasion of Afghanistan. So I think although it hurts, and it doesn't hurt less anytime it happens, but there is some historical perspective that some Afghans take when they look at these events, and it means they're not shocked by some of these developments, even though they're maybe heartbroken, but they're not shocked given the historical context they have. and it is a complex picture. As you said, there is a lot of it's for most Afghan, it's an established fact that the Taliban movement received support from the establishment in Pakistan. The existence of sanctuaries, the fact that Osama bin Laden was killed there, the whole justification for war on terror, and I mean there is a complex relationship between the Taliban movement and the establishment in Pakistan, and many Afghans see that with resentment. It is very true. The added complication is the issue of TMP freedom, the Pashtun movement in the region. So there is a Pashtun nationalism that often many Pashtuns in Afghanistan sympathize with, which has a difficult relationship with the government in Pakistan. So that's an added element as well. But there is also the fact that millions of Afghans, literally millions of Afghans, lived in Pakistan. They see Pakistan as a place where they live, they spend their childhood, the place they still have families, the place they have friends. I mean, they grew up there. They receive an education. If you compare, for example, the treatment of refugees by Pakistan government compared to Iranian treatment of refugees, Iranian government treatment of refugees, obviously there's a stark difference. And a lot of Afghans, I think, appreciate that there is much more sense of hospitality, welcoming, and seeing lack of racism, just honestly, lack of racism on the Pakistani side towards the population of Afghans who live there. Also, at the same time, obviously millions of Afghans living in another country also creates tensions, which many Afghans have also experienced. Towards the end, with regard to evacuation, there's been a complex picture. As you know, there is a lot of, Taliban, a lot of analysts rightly pointed out that the Taliban ascent to power may not be an ideal scenario for the Pakistani government, just because of the fact that there could be a spillover, as you said. Already, Taliban have released many elements of the leadership of the Pakistani Talibans who were imprisoned in Afghanistan. So in effect, they've already strengthened the Pakistani Taliban, and there are there's a lot of solidarity between Pakistani Taliban, Afghan Taliban, and many other groups that are active in the region that Pakistan may see as a threat to its population and the region. So it is a very complex picture. With regard to evacuation, Pakistan has extended its support. I know yesterday or today there was a report that the Pakistan Foreign Minister was talking to the British, his British counterpart, about the possibility of helping UK citizens and other UK evacuees being evacuated through the help of Pakistan. The United States does not have the same relationship with Pakistan for obvious reasons at this point, at least, but it is likely that the Pakistan is going to play an increasingly larger role after the Kabul airport is handed over August 31st in helping evacuate at least some European citizens, or maybe the British citizens for sure, but other European countries may also talk to Pakistan about this. The US obviously may or may not, but we don't know that yet. So it's a complex relationship. There are a lot of causes for concern and tension. There's a lot of bonds that connect the two nations. If you ask my personal opinion, I think the future of both countries depend on improving relationships. I tweeted early on that if Taliban are able to create a broad-based government in Afghanistan, and there were some reports that the Pakistani Taliban, the Tehrik-e-Taliban of Pakistan, were also negotiating some sort of settlement with some sort of peace agreement with the Pakistani government. If those two things happen, the whole region may experience transformative peace and stability, something that we haven't seen for long. And that would be a huge boost for regional connectivity. The opportunity for economic gains is enormous in this region. There's so much potential that has gone wasted just because of the dynamics that have unfolded over the years. If that region can experience some stability and peace, that I hope can happen, it will be an enormous boost for regional connectivity, and it can transform the lives of both Afghans and Pakistanis. And I hope that's the path we are embarking on.